Welcome back to lesson one of this new week. This week, we are talking poetic devices. And the first one that we're going to mention is one that we already know that we've talked about before. But this is a review so that we can use it in the poetry that we work with this week, as well as the poetry that we write with. So we're going to go metaphor and simile. With the metaphor and simile, we know these glorious words. We know how they show up, but let's go through the definitions of both of them and how they show up within the types of writing we're talking about. So, first thing for metaphor, we know that it is a figure of speech comparing two unlike things that have something in common. With this one, it does not use the words like or as in the statement. So, if we look at our examples, nature's calling cards are blooming in the garden, which gives you like this beautiful idea that they have. Like, think of spring right now as the flowers come up. This is their calling card. It is showing beauty. It is being glorious. Another example would be the train is a needle plunging into the fabric of night. It gives you this really intense idea, this really intense visual of what the author is trying to say about something. And that's the one thing that I really like about metaphors. So when we think about metaphors, something is another thing. And we take out that like or as statement. It's not like something, it is something. The train is a needle going into night. So really direct, really forceful in the way that they use it. So when we talk about metaphor in prose, so written pieces that are out there, think about varying types of literature. It helps to describe things in unusual ways, and it gives a little bit more of an expression in a meeting rather than having just a direct statement. So, like, the train is going into darkness. Well, that's very direct. If we want to make it more vibrant, more intriguing to the reader, that's when you're going to go back to that previous example of the train is like a needle plunging into the fabric of night. The other part, too, is that it can suggest mood and it can leave a lasting image. So, one example, Ralph Waldo Emerson, one of my favorites, beauty without grace is the hook without the bait. So, we get very direct idea of what it is. So, if we don't have grace within beauty, then we're just fishing without bait. And it gives you like this really prominent idea, especially if you know fishing, like you can feel how those things are relating to each other. The other thing we can look at is how it shows up in poetry. So it's very similar to prose. All of those same things are true. But the nice thing, too, is that we get more in depth with the presence of ideas, feelings, and images, and they become really vivid in our minds. The other part, too, is that they become very useful in the sense that with poetry, poetry is condensed. We have epic poems out there, but we want to go ahead and we want to bring things into this like very small sort of spacing in comparison to like a novel. And we want to make sure that we use the precise, correct words. So metaphors can help us with that and can really give us quick ideas, quick feelings in a short amount of time, in a short amount of space. So if you look at this poem, just a portion of it from E. E. Cummings, along the little treacherous bright streets. So the the brittle, treacherous, bright streets of memory. Again, giving you that metaphor right there. So bright streets of memory. That's a is memory bright? I don't know. It's an interesting thing to think about. Okay, moving on. Simile. Let's go to simile. So with a simile, again, we're comparing things. These are all about comparisons this week. So two unlike things, but now we are using like or as in that comparison. So our examples, the ball shot over the home plate like a white bullet. Vacation went by as fast as a flea's wink. Interesting examples for this week, but that's all we're doing, comparing two things that don't seem alike, but we're going to use that like or as in order to really make that point prominent for us. So if we look at this, it helps readers see things in a fresh way. And it creates an actual image or picture in the mind. And then the nice part too. So if you think about when you write similes, a good simile is going to be one that seems surprising to a reader. It's not something that they're going to expect when they're going into the writing. Like, I never thought about having those comparisons together. That's what you want the reader to do. So you want to think about similes that don't feel like they belong. Same with like metaphors. You want it to be good. You want it to be surprising for the people who are coming into it. Okay. So here is an example. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but if we look for metaphors and for similes, we can go right to Shakespeare because he was really good at doing that kind of stuff. I know some of you are not a fan of him. I know that going through Macbeth was long and drawn out, but this is a really great place to start if we're going to look for that kind of information. So, one of his famous poems, All the World's a Stage, if we just look at this first part, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. He acts being 7 ages. At first, the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms, and then the whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like snail unwillingly to school. And then the lover, sighing like furnace, with a woeful ballad made to his mistress's eyebrow. So if you notice, you can go every single line and find a metaphor or simile, something that's there to give you a really strong idea about how the world is a stage and how we as individuals play that role. So this is one way to look at it, one example that we can use. Another beautiful example that's out there, we have lying in a hammock at William Duffy's farm in Pine Island, Minnesota. This one, I love going through this one. I just think it's really fascinating. But over my head, I see the bronze butterfly asleep on the black trunk, blowing like a leaf in green shadow. Down the ravine behind the empty house, the cowbells follow one another into the distances of the afternoon. To my right, in a field of sunlight between 2 pines, the droppings of last year's horses blaze up into golden stones. I lean back as the evening darkens and comes on. A chicken hawk floats over, looking for home. I have wasted my life. So, if we look for a metaphor or simile in here, one of the ones that we can pay attention to is kind of towards the beginning. So, blowing like a leaf in green shadow, that would be one of the ones that I would go directly towards. Um, but you can find other examples as well. For your assignments this week, you have 2 that are going to go along with metaphors and similes. The first one is Valentine by Carol Ann Duffy. This, you're going to go through that same format, learning, not learning, sorry, looking more at how to read a poem and going through that process, as well as looking and identifying some of those metaphors and similes that show up. The second poem is A Noiseless Patient Spider by Walt Whitman. This is going to do the same thing, so following through with those steps, looking more in depth. With these, if you have questions, please email, stop in on one of the virtual office hours so that I can help you out with them. These are going to be a little bit more in depth with the content of the poem, so just be thoughtful about your responses and add in what you can using evidence from the text.